Yeah, this is a high ceiling type player. He could
Hmm.
be easily one of the top tight ends in fantasy football if he starts connecting on these routes and producing fantasy points. Um, he's had great fantasy seasons in the past, so it's definitely not out of the question. I think it's just a matter of
What's up, Guff? Grown Up Fantasy Football is back. Joey Marino, Zach Maziarz, James Reiner. The three of us are about to do what we consider the unthinkable. Yes,
Dun,
we
dun,
are
dun.
taking the daunted NFC East and building the ultimate fantasy team.
The ultimate garbage fantasy team.
We're doing
We're
a little
quite
dumpster
proud.
diving. Yes. We're doing some dumpster diving, and we'll be building the ultimate fantasy team. 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, even a kicker, and a defense.
Don't forget a flex, too.
and the
And that flex. That's right. Definitely have a flex. But
We're turning this division's trash into your fantasy treasure.
that's right.
Looking at this, I think it actually is a pretty decent fantasy team. If someone
No,
were to
yeah,
have
there's
this.
definitely some value and some good names here. So can't wait.
Wait.
Get us into it, Joey.
All right. Well, first, before we start, be sure and like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of fantasy football content. We're posting about 4 days a week, so be sure and hit that subscribe button and give it a like. Give us a comment on who your ultimate fantasy lineup from the NFC East would be. And if you're listening on the podcast, subscribe there too, wherever you are. We want those subscriptions. They're beautiful.
Let us know
help
what
us out a
division to do next, too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
do that. But without further ado, let's get into today's topic. All right, so we are building, like we said, the ultimate NFC East fantasy lineup. And to get it started, I'm going to start us off with the quarterback position. And I think this would have gone to someone if he had not gotten injured for the entire season.
Sure.
But that makes it a little more interesting because now we have to pick and choose out of some other players. But the player
Andy
we're
Dalton's
going
better.
with, clearly, but the player we're going with on our lineup is the quarterback from the Philadelphia Eagles, Carson Wentz. Now, I know what everybody's thinking. Yes, the Eagles are pitiful, and Wentz looks terrible with 10 picks. That is true. However, Carson Wentz is the quarterback 10 on the season. He has a terrible offensive line, but he's the best out of what else is in the NFC East. Andy Dalton, Daniel Jones, and the combo of Alex Smith and Kyle Allen. I think once Wentz gets his receivers back, he should kind of even out a little more. And what's really cool about Carson Wentz is he putting up 17 points or more in 4 out of his 6 games this season. So, yes, he's been throwing lots of picks, and yes, it's been very difficult to get stuff going for Philly, but Wentz has put together a decent fantasy season so far. What do you guys think?
James, you can go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think Wentz is definitely the safest QB in this division, without a doubt. He's clearly the most talented quarterback in this division, and he's still putting decent fantasy games together right now, even with a terrible offensive line, no wide receivers. But I think the Red Rifle, Andy Dalton, actually has a higher ceiling. I think he has the potential to put up more fantasy points than Carson Wentz because he has a stacked offense, great running back, great wide receivers, and McCarthy runs a pretty solid offense.
Yeah, I definitely don't disagree with this pick. James, I do agree with what you said there. I think it takes a little bit of time for Dalton to kind of mesh with that offense. Last week we saw him his first official start with the Cowboys. I think it gets better for them, But what I'm liking about Wentz a lot is they are trying to utilize his legs. He is getting a good bit of rushing yards. They're trying to simplify things because of all the injuries they've had on offense, to where they're saying, hey, we have to win some of these games and fight our way through by utilizing Carson Wentz on the ground. So that's actually what I'm really liking to see, to where I think he gives you actually a good and safe floor, knowing that they'll probably have to come back from behind. But then on top of that, they're wanting Wentz to run the ball a lot more. So I think he gives you a great floor. So I like this pick, Joey.
Thank you very much. I agree. And moving on to the running back 1 position, I think this is pretty obvious. We're going with Ezekiel Elliott, running back for the Cowboys. He's the RB2 on the season. The offense for the Cowboys, like we've kind of alluded to, is really not the same without Dak Prescott there. And his workload is kind of been shorter this season. He's had fewer rushing attempts from the beginning of this season. However, his passing volume is really high this season. I think the Cardinals game that they just had was a bit of an outlier. He should be fine going forward. Zach, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's no question you have to have Zeke here. You can't really have anyone else as your RB1 in this division. I do think they lean heavily on Zeke as well in order to establish Andy Dalton. I think that's the game plan, wanting to get that play action passes going and be able to establish the run with Zeke to where the passing lanes do open. So I think, like you said, Joey, the Cardinals game was an outlier. Most other games this season will be getting Zeke the ball, allowing him to feast, and then from there having those open lanes to throw with and hopefully easing that pressure off of Andy Dalton.
Not much to add here. He's the clear-cut RB1 in the NFC East. If you disagree, you can fight me. My address is 218 Millbury Drive. I am not afraid of you.
That's right.
You're going to get some weird things in the mail now, James.
I'm not afraid.
Well, I'm glad you're not. But yeah, we're going with Zeke at RB1. And then RB2, we're going with Miles Sanders, running back from the Philly Eagles. He's the RB18 on the season. Like Carson Wentz, he's suffering from that poor offensive line and additionally some injuries he's had himself. There is a bit of an injury risk. However, when he's healthy, he can kind of take over a game. He had 22.9 points against Pittsburgh, who is number 1 against running backs. That tells you anything. Additionally, he's 6th in rushing yards this season and has had 25 targets through 6 games. That's incredible. With all these wide receiver injuries, Miles Sanders is taking on a lot of the passing work, and his schedule kind of opens up later in the season. So, James, what do you think about Miles Sanders?
I think it's another obvious choice. He's clearly the most productive, second most fantasy productive back in the NFC East. He's putting up points right now, and there's really, the other running back options are Freeman, Gibson. No contest, really.
Yeah, I would take a injured, which I'm not sure how long Miles Sanders is going to be out for. I know he's not going to play this upcoming game, but I would still take a Miles Sanders who's going to miss like 1, 2, maybe even 3 games over Devontae Freeman and Antonio Gibson. So, yeah, give me Sanders.
Yep, I agree. So, Zach, why don't you give us the wide receiver 1 for our team?
All right, wide receiver 1, and I feel like this one shouldn't come with discrepancy, but it actually might. We have Amari Cooper as our wide receiver 1. Now, the biggest discrepancy, I think, here is the breakout of CeeDee Lamb. So a lot of people are thinking and wondering who that really wide receiver 1 is in Dallas, either Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. I know Andy Dalton coming into the fold now doesn't really clear up things, but let's dive into Amari Cooper, why we picked him. So he is an 80% snap share right now. Cowboys right now are currently running 50 pass plays per game, which is the league high. They're number 1 in the league with that. So that just says a good floor right there for both Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. But Amari Cooper on the season, he's run 268 routes, which is number 2 among wide receivers. CeeDee Lamb is number 4 among wide receivers right now there. So he's beaten him in that category. He has 65 targets on the season, which is number 2 among wide receivers as well. CeeDee Lamb actually is number 33. He's number 9 right now on target. So Amari Cooper's beating him in that category. And then lastly, we have 8 red zone targets for Amari Cooper, which is huge. And that's number 2 on the season. CeeDee Lamb ranks number 30 3 in red zone targets. So those red zone targets, and those routes run really kind of cement to myself why I would pick Amari Cooper here over CeeDee Lamb as that wide receiver 1. Looking at all of his metrics too, just with the Cowboys' lack of defense, both of them I feel like are going to feast regardless. But if we go back to the Bengals days where, there's Andy Dalton, AJ Green, and Tyler Boyd, AJ Green was still that number 1. Tyler Boyd was a very, very good receiver still, but Andy Dalton relied heavily on his vet, AJ Green, who was that superior talent. I feel like we're going to see a lot of the same here with Amari Cooper being that kind of vet, that superior talent, and then CeeDee Lamb is still going to have good games and good production, but Amari Cooper is still going to be that number 1. And then moving forward down the schedule too, he's got, not the best schedule, but still should be able to feast. He was able to have a 17-point game in half PPR against the Cardinals, who are number 10 against defenses. Number 10 against wide receivers. And then Rams, number 2 against wide receivers. He still had over double-digit points. So I think Amari Cooper is the one here. But what do y'all think?
I think it's pretty obvious Cooper should be number 1 here. He's the most reliable out of all these wide receivers in the NFC East. I think he has the safest floor, and I think he has the highest ceiling. I don't really have much to add to that. I think it's the obvious one.
Yeah. How about you, Joey?
I agree. I think CeeDee Lamb's emergence is real, but the target share is behind Cooper. Cooper's the one on that team. The only thing I'll say is Amari Cooper's the wide receiver 7 on the season. So, yeah, it's a pretty obvious choice.
Yeah, and like we're talking about with Andy Dalton, hopefully that Cowboys offense is able to kind of get a glimpse of hope with Andy Dalton, kind of get their feet established under them with him having a little bit more game time action. So, yeah, hopefully we'll see him favor Amari Cooper in this situation.
Mm-hmm. For wide receiver 2, we have Scary Terry McLaurin. This is where we might be getting into some conflict here. But he's really the only real offensive threat on the Washington football team, and he's still getting targets. He's still putting up decent stats, even with inconsistent quarterback play. I think he's just like some of the other wide receivers, like CeeDee Lamb or Fulgham, might have a higher ceiling, but I think Scary Terry gives you the safer floor. So I think that's why we're putting him as our wide receiver 2. What's your thoughts, Joey?
Yeah, there's some good wide receivers in this conference. Not a whole lot you've got to work with, but you got Cooper and Lamb. Darius Slayton's another good one. But I think Terry McLaurin is definitely the person with like the safest floor in there. He's gonna get volume. He's the best weapon on that team, like you said, and he can be good without like a star quarterback or anything. He's proven it from last year, even the beginning of this year with Dwayne Haskins. And there's a lot of favorable matchups coming up for wide receivers for Washington. So, yeah, I think Terry McLaurin's a very good choice for wide receiver 2. Zach?
Yeah, I agree. I think that wide receiver 2, though, there is a pretty big tier break between our wide receiver 1 and the wide receiver 2, where it is kind of a toss-up of, you could technically go Darius Slayton. You could technically go Travis Fulgham. Fulgham right now is an interesting player because we saw an emergence game with basically just an unhealthy Philadelphia offense. And then we were like, okay, well, let's hold him. Let's see how he does. He had a second great game. So you're wondering, okay, is he going to be the number 1 receiver now, even with Alshon coming back, Deshaun Jackson coming back, because they're kind of old, used goods. So we don't know that. But I still would go Terry because I just feel like he has the highest upside to actually be a wide receiver 1. I feel like the others are great, will have good games, but ultimately at the end of the day, they'll probably still be a wide receiver 2 for you.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting actually you brought up Fulgham, and I actually had a mention on Twitter asking if I would drop Edelman for Fulgham.
Ooh.
Yeah, it was interesting. I told him that maybe not. I'd try to look for trade value first for Edelman and see if I can get something out of that. Because I think Fulgham, he's come on this year, but once Alshon and Rager and Deshaun Jackson come back, I think he'll still have a role, but I don't know. It won't be this big, obviously.
Right. That's a tough one. I would possibly do it. I feel like Edelman is showing us right now that he is very much matchup based, to where they have a good matchup, he can have a good game. Honestly, the entire Patriots right now, I feel like are matchup based. So, if they're going to go against a defense who's not that great, then yeah, you could start them. If not, they're probably going to be riding your bench or getting you maybe 4 points. So Fulgham, even if they go against a good defense or something like that, like they're going to be playing from behind most likely, and he's looking like he's the number one. I think Doug Peterson came out and said too that even when they have other wide receivers come back healthy, he's earned his snap share. So I could see them actually using him as the wide receiver one there from now on. So that's an interesting question for sure.
Hey, I think Fulgham should be rostered.
Yeah.
Edelman's your worst player in your team, though, to drop for him? I find that hard to believe. I feel like you have someone else on your roster you can drop.
Yeah, there's got to be.
There must be someone else, yeah. All right, awesome. Well, let's move on to the tight end. We have Evan Engram of the New York Giants. Right now, he has a 90% snap share rate. He has 35 targets on the season, and a lot of the routes he is running are actually within the slot. So they're trying to get him involved. They're trying to get him open, but his target share is dropping a little bit. Beginning of the season, we saw him having 8 targets, 10 targets, 7 targets, and now he's dropping down to 3, 4. So it's a little concerning. But then Jason Garrett's also come out and said he's one of the most athletically talented on the offense besides Barkley. So it's kind of a don't know which scenario they're going with. Are they trying to get him more involved, or I feel like just the last couple of years we've seen them not able to utilize Engram in the way that we want to see. So honestly, having Evan Engram as our tight end here, I feel like is more along the lines of his athletic ability, just knowing that he can do it. So hopefully the targets come because he's running the routes, he's getting the snap share. So if we can get better play from Daniel Jones, if the targets can come, he should feast based on his athletic ability. What do y'all think?
Yeah, this is a high ceiling type player. He could be easily one of the top tight ends in fantasy football if he starts connecting on these routes and producing fantasy points. He's had great fantasy seasons in the past, so it's definitely not out of the question. I think it's just a matter of Giants got to produce, and I think Engram will help them do that.
Yep.
Yeah, it's Danny Dimes. He's a turnover machine pretty much. So it's kind of hard to really trust Evan Engram in here. I think, if Zach Ertz or even Dallas Goedert, if Dak was still playing, I'd even think Dalton Schultz would be a pretty good option here. But you've got injuries, and it doesn't look like Schultz is getting the same kind of workload he had with Dak. So I think Evan Ingram's probably the best option out of here. Logan Thomas also is not a bad tight end either, but I'd still take the upside of Evan Engram.
Yeah,
of all those.
If Dallas Goedert were healthy, we might be talking a different name in this category. But I mean, we saw even with Zach Ertz, healthy, no Dallas Goedert, teams were just able to key in on him. So I don't even know if that would make much of an impact. So yeah, I think Evan Ingram's got the highest upside for sure.
All right, moving on to our flex position. We're going with Antonio Gibson. This is a tough one because there's a lot of good players you can put here. Fulgham, Freeman, Lamb, Gallup. You can make an argument for any of them. I think why we went with Gibson is because he's a running back. He's an RB2 right now in 12-man leagues. And he's probably the safest. He has check-down kings playing quarterback right now, so that's very good for him. He's good in the passing game. And he's getting more carries. I think he's a solid RB2 in any lineup, really.
Yeah, I like what you said, James. We value running back a whole lot more than we do other positions, so that was one of the reasons we included Gibson as the flex here. I think Ron Rivera knows what he's doing, especially with his running back position as well, so I feel like for those people who are thinking that Gibson's getting phased out, talent-wise, he is the best talent at running back on that team, so I do not think he'll be phased out. I think he will continue to see a good bit of touches, especially through the passing game. Like you said, they have a check down king right there. Even if they go Alex Smith or Kyle Allen, both check down a good bit. So we're able to see that passing down work there. So, yeah, I like Gibson here at the flex for sure.
I like him too. He's the running back 24 on the season, so he's a solid RB2. He may have, outside of probably CeeDee Lamb, have the most upside out of all the rest of these players. The only thing that does worry me though is J.D. McKissic is still getting a lot of touches and a lot of passes too. But I think Antonio Gibson has the higher upside of the two, And I think the talent is there definitely for Antonio Gibson. So yeah, I'm fine with him in a flex here.
Yeah. I think one of the only other names that I would have contemplated, but still would pick Gibson over, is CeeDee Lamb,
Yeah.
just because we talked about him possibly being that wide receiver one. But if you think about it, if you are coming up with the roster, formulating a team, you really cap your upside if you play two receivers on the same team. Because if Andy Dalton's got a bad day, or maybe Zeke feasts where there's not as much wide receiver output, if you have two wide receivers, you're basically shortening your odds, saying like, okay, one of them is actually bound to have a bad day at some point. So at least here you have the highest chance of upside by starting two different players on the team.
Mm-hmm.
All right, awesome. Well, let's go on to the kicker. We have Greg the Legatron Zerloin. And not much to say here. I mean, if you have all of those nicknames, I feel like you're kind of going to be the kicker that we're going to establish. He's the most trusted of all of those kickers on the NFC East teams. He's done it before, and with the Rams, he showed us that big boom leg he's got. And I feel like with Dalton in the fold, I think he can move the ball better than he did against the Cardinals. But I still think they're not the same offense without Dak. So I could see them getting to the red zone, but still getting stuffed and needing to kick it a little bit more. So even relying on Greg the Leg to get you those points when you can. So I could see him being the best fantasy value at kicker in this division right now. What do y'all think?
Cowboys is probably the best offense in this division. That's usually what I chase when going with kickers. I mean, they're pretty unpredictable besides that. So, yeah, I agree. Legatron.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to this is I look at high-scoring offenses when I pick a kicker, and I also look at offenses that are not high touchdown producing but can move the ball. And I even started the season with Jake Elliott from Philly, and he was fine. He was solid. But Graham Gano has actually been a really solid kicker, getting a lot of field goals for the Giants. So, I mean, it's kind of a crapshoot with kickers, and yeah, I'd just go with Legatron because of the high-scoring offense.
Mm-hmm.
All right. To close this out, we're going with the Washington football team as our defense. There's not a lot of good defenses in this conference. This is probably the only decent one. They have one of the best D-lines when healthy, I think, in the NFL. They can cause pressure, and they can get those sacks, cause turnovers. I think it's your best chance going forward.
Yeah, I think the football team has the most consistent defense out of these. The Giants have ascended to like defense 7 on the season, but it's coming on the back of 2 games against Washington and against Dallas. So, yeah, they boomed, but I don't really trust the Giants' defense that much. I'd rather trust Ron Rivera and Washington's defense. Their defense 13 on the season, too.
Luckily for each of these defenses in this division, they play each other a good bit. That actually helps like all of them have some sort of value because they play each other several times during the season. I agree, though. Washington football team's the one that plays like an NFL defense. All the others, I feel like, especially Dallas's, I feel like play like a JV high school football team's defense. So, yeah, the Washington football team, they're the safest for you. Like you said, that D-line's pretty good too. So, yeah, I'd rather have them.
Yeah, so that is going to round it out for our NFC East edition of the Ultimate Fantasy Team. And repeat that lineup, we're going with Carson Wentz at quarterback, Ezekiel Elliott, RB1, Miles Sanders at RB2, wide receiver 1, Amari Cooper, wide receiver 2, Terry McLaurin, tight end Evan Ingram, at our flex, Antonio Gibson, kicker, Greg Zuerlein, and the defense of the Washington football team. So let us know in the comments what you think of our team. If it's crap, yeah, we know we're picking from the NFC East, but if it's good, then let us know and tell us good job.
I wouldn't mind this lineup in my fantasy league.
No,
I
think
you
have a solid team.
Definitely not the worst. Yeah.
Yeah. So comment below what your lineup would be too. Be sure to like and subscribe, comment, and subscribe again on the podcast, and go get guffed.